I had mentioned yesterday the Rabbeinu Bachya, who was a student of the Rambam. He explains that although the Torah tells us that Sarah Imeinu was 127 years old when she passed away, but the passage begins, Vayihiyu, and they were. So he explains that the numerical value of Vayihiyu is 37. Sarah Imeinu gave birth to Yitzhak at the age of 90. She lived until she was 127 years old. But the Yuchai, what was the life of Sarah? Even though physically she lived and had many experiences during this period, was 127 years, but her life, the essence of her life was those 37 years. Sarah Imeinu, as we see the whole story with Hagar and how she drove out Hagar and Yishmael, because she was concerned that he'd be some level of negative influence on Yitzchak, or whatever followed, was only because of a concern that Yitzchak, being the future patriarch, has to achieve a level of perfection within the spiritual realm to be able to be the ultimate patriarch to father Yaakov, who's going to be the one who's going to father the 12 tribes. So Ayu Chai Sora, what was the essence of her life? The essence of her life were those 37 years. Vayu, Gematria, numerically, Vayu is 37. The Malaturim, in the second interpretation, says the same thing. Vayu, the Gematria, numerically, is 37. It's interesting. We find later that the Torah tells us that after Sarah Imeinu passes away, it says, Avraham is Zoki Bo Bayomim. Avraham is old, advanced in age, and he summons Eliezer to tell him that he must find a wife for Yitzhak, the future matriarch. But over there, before it says that, before he instructs him, Torah tells us, Hashem Berach Avram Bakol, and Hashem blessed Avram with everything. And Rashi over the cites Medrash. What is Bakol? Bakol numerically is Ben. Bakol and Ben, a son, is 52. He was blessed with everything. So what did he was blessed with everything? Avraham Avinu, in terms of his level of accomplishment. Initially, the people he had converted in Choron, Avraham Megayer Esanoshim, Sarah Megayer Esanoshim, he converted the males to monotheism. She converted the women. He went to Egypt. There was a Kiddush Hashem. He fought the 4 kings. He was declared to be the Prince of God, the Sea of Elohim Atov Zochenu. Avraham Avinu, his levels of achievement are unending. He brought God to the world. But what would we say? He was blessed with everything. Was everything that he had the son? That was everything. It's the same, but it's the same concept. Everything that he did, the ultimate accomplishment was that he merited to have a son to carry on his legacy. That Yitzchak, he was able to achieve and merit a son who was the future patriarch, who was ultimately going to continue, and he's going to have a son, Yaakov. As we said, the only reason why Avram was redeemed from the kiln based on a pasuk, it was Yaakov had redeemed him. If a man gives his life al Kiddush Hashem, he has the ultimate place in the world to come, but he survived the kiln. Why? Because if he would have died then, there wouldn't have been a Yitzhak, and there wouldn't have been Yitzhak, there would have been a Yaakov. And since Yaakov had to come into being, because he had a father of 12 tribes, therefore Hashem intervened at that moment and brought about the miracle that he came out of the kiln. So Hashem Be'ech Avram Bakol, he had everything. That was everything. Because if his legacy could not continue, whatever his accomplishments were, it doesn't bring about the objective of creation, which is ultimately Kabbalah Sator Sinai. That is the objective. The objective of life, of existence, is Bereshis Bar Elokim and Sheshamayim V'Soretz. Bishul Yisrael Shnikar Reishis, for the sake of the Jewish people and for the sake of Torah. And that only could be if there's going to be a Yaakov. Because only Yaakov was qualified. He was the most advanced of the patriarchs to be able to father the 12 tribes. So we speak about, he was blessed with everything. What is everything? He had Yitzchok, Bakol is B'gematria Ben, Vayiyu is B'gematria 37. Those were the years Sarah Imeinu had given birth to Yitzchok, and she mentored him, and she supervised him, and she watched over him like a hawk, that there should be nothing negative should in any way impair or compromise his potential of growth during that period of time. That's the equivalent of Bakol. So they're in sync, both Avram and Sarah are in sync regarding what like we say, Torah Keva, Malachat Haroi. The Torah should be primary, everything else is secondary. Everything else is only to facilitate the objective, which is what? Which is the Torah itself. Sarah Imeinu, in prophecy, she was greater than Avraham. As Chazal tell us. She was a very holy woman. She was taken by the king of Egypt and nearly defiled, but she was not defiled. Miraculously, she was at a level that she was able to, when he approached her, she said to the angel, smite him, he was smitten. And his whole household was smitten. Avraham goes to the Philistine area. HaMelech takes her. And soon afterwards, it becomes known she's pregnant. All the issues in Avraham, she was not pregnant. And all of a sudden, she conceives. So what did people say? People said, who fathered the child she's carrying? Avimelech. Yitzchok is not the son of Avraham, he's the son of Avimelech. Therefore, the Torah has to attest to the fact and tell us, El told us, Yitzchok ben Avraham, Avraham holined is Yitzchok. Yitzchok is the son of Avraham, and beyond any doubt, Avraham holined is Yitzchok. Why? Because the physical appearance of Yitzchok and Yaakov were identical. They were like identical twins. That nobody should mistake for a second that Yitzchok is the son of Avraham, and Yitzchok is not the son of Avimelech. So Hashem performed this miracle that nobody should ever consider saying that, because people say you never know. But if he looks exactly like his father, so now that question is put to rest. Could you imagine a woman as holy as Sarah Imeinu is allowed to be in the clutches of this monster, this Avimelech, this pompous person who is everything which is the antithesis of Kedusha? Why did Hashem allow this? And afterwards, even people should consider that maybe he impregnated her. It's something which, you cringe when you hear it. Such a holy woman. Why did Hashem allow it? So we had said in the past, we find something very interesting. The objective of life, as the Rambam says, in Hilchos Tshuva, will always put in the position, every person, based on the Gemara, everything in one's life is predestined, except Yerushalayim. When the droplet of semen is brought before God, before a woman conceives, Hashem pronounces in that droplet, Chacham Tipesh, will he be wise or foolish? Giber Cholosh, strong, weak. Ashironi, wealthy, poor. Every pronouncement of that, the future of that child is pronounced, the destiny of that child. Except one pronouncement is not said, Tzadik v'Rosha. That's the only thing which is not said. And that's Bechira. Every human being has the ability to make a choice between good and evil. So Tzadik v'Rosha, that pronouncement is not made. Now, what is Bechira? Meaning there's a certain balance, and because of that balance, now you have a question, you have to make a discernment between good and evil and make the right choice. And you have the ability to make the right choice. Therefore, if you don't make the right choice, there's culpability. And if you do make the right choice, as the Rambam says, because it was only through your own initiative you made the right choice, therefore, you're deserving of the result of that right choice. So everything is based on the initiative of the person. What about if a person is in a situation where the good is so overwhelming, it totally negates, but not even dismisses a consideration for the wrong, for the evil. Rameir Simcha writes that by Kabbalah Satorah it says, Kofel Mehar Kegigis. We were at Sinai, after we said, Nasa Nishma, Hashem put the mountain over our heads. So he says, in one possible interpretation, that, and the Gemara says that was Modor Rabbeinu Raisa. Because he put the mountain over our heads, we had no choice. Therefore, there's a certain level of disclaimer. So he explains that at Sinai, we had no choice. God's presence was so obvious and irrefutable, and we were so spiritualized, we had no choice. And because we had no choice, therefore we saw it on an absolute level. There was no choice. If there'd only been Avraham Avinu in the world, and there's no counterbalance to Avram, mankind would not have a choice. Would not have a choice. So who was the counterbalance to Avram? So we said this in the past. Nimrod was the counterbalance to Avram. Nimrod, the king who had thrown Avram into the kiln because he would not bow to the idol, he was the counterbalance to Avram Avinu. Now, isn't it ironic that the day that Avram passed away, which will happen in the future, on that same day Nimrod was killed. Esav killed Nimrod on the day that Avram passed away. Here you have two people representing opposite ends of the pole over here, good and evil. On the day that Avram's taken, that same day Nimrod's taken. Why? Because the world couldn't exist with one without the other. Avram had to have a counterbalance. Avram's influence over the world was so positive, as it says, anybody entered into the tent of Avram Avinu as a pagan, left the tent as a believer, as a monotheist. That was the level of influence he had. Not only because of his intellectualism, because of his representation of spirituality. So the day Avram died, Nimrod had to die. Now, who was the successor to Avram? Yitzchak. If, let's say, it would have been beyond any doubt that Yitzchak is Ben Avram, Yitzchak would be the same level of influence as his father. If that's the case, what happens? The balance is off. The balance to positive is overwhelmingly greater than the negative. As it says, who is the counterbalance in the Midrash? Who is the counterbalance to Yitzchak? HaMelech. He was the counterbalance to Yitzchak. He was the story. There was a famine. He became wealthy. He drove from his community. They made a covenant between the two of them. But this is the Midrash. The counterbalance was Yitzchak. But Yitzchak already was compromised. You know why Yitzchak was compromised? In terms of his representation? Because since his mother was taken, and there was a question of who fathered Yitzchak, that was the compromise on his representation. But if it would have never ever been a question that Yitzchak was Ben Avram, you wouldn't have had, HaMelech wouldn't have been a sufficient counterbalance. So Hashem allowed this thing to happen, this trauma to happen, to occlude it slightly, that people say, but he looks exactly like his father. He's a spitting image of his father. You want to know something? There's an expression, when you throw enough mud, there's something left. There's always some dirt left. You say, he looks like his father, impossible. You know what people say? You never know. You never know. So there's a custom cited, not in halacha, but it's cited based on Kabbalistic sources, that a woman, when she's pregnant, she shouldn't go to the zoo. Why shouldn't she go to the zoo? The Gemara tells us in Brachos, Rabbi Yochanan had one of a kind of beauty. Literally, he radiated beauty. So Rabbi Yochanan would sit, a woman goes to the mikveh, keeps family purity, and the night that she goes to the mikveh and returns, a husband has a conjugal obligation. That's a conjugal obligation night in the mikveh. Why? Because in terms of conception, she ovulates. That's the primary time that she can ovulate. And therefore, besides being separated, therefore, a husband has a conjugal obligation to his wife, the night in the mikveh. So Rabbi Yochanan, having such beauty, he would sit by the gates of the mikveh. So when the women would come out of the mikveh, they would look at his beauty. So when they would have relations with their husbands, because that if beauty impacted on them to such a degree, they would have beautiful children. Because they would visualize that beauty, it had that effect on them, mentally, emotionally. So what you see can impact on the child. So the beauty of the children was based upon seeing Rabbi Yochanan. So the Gemara asks, you mean Rabbi Yochanan was not concerned about ayin hara? If everybody looks at him and everybody's talking about his beauty, you can have an ayin hara, right? Ayin hara. So Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan, because he was a descendant from Yosef, and Yosef received the bracha from his father, Ben Porat Yosef, the way the Sfardim say it. Simon, you're Syrian, no? Ben Porat Yosef, As a result of that, he says, I'm not concerned. I'm not susceptible to ayin hara. But we see over here that when a woman's pregnant, what she sees impacts her to the degree that actually the child could develop with something which she saw because it had such a significant effect on her. It's cited that a woman, when she's pregnant, she shouldn't go to the zoo. She sees like different kinds of animals. You never know how it can affect her. It can affect actually the way the child will look. The halacha states, it's based on the Gemara, rule in Shulchan Aruch. When you see an unusual creature, you say a bracha. What's the bracha you say? Mishana Abrios. God creates different kinds of creatures, an unusual creature. So therefore, the Rambam's, the Mechaber the Shulchan Aruch rules based on the Gemara. If you see a monkey, you're supposed to say an ape. You're supposed to say Mishana Abrios. God creates these unusual creatures. You see an elephant, you say Mishana Abrios. But that's only if you live in a society where you don't normally see these creatures. Since you don't normally see these creatures, when you see them, you say it because it's like you're taken aback. You say Mishana Brios. It's like something which is a certain abnormality or something which is so extremely unusual. That's the bracha you say. So if you go to the zoo and you see certain things there, you never know how it could impact. Therefore, certain people have customs that when a woman's pregnant, she doesn't go to the zoo because you never know how that experience can impact on the development of the child. But the main thing is we see from Rabbi Yochanan. So I'm saying that he looked like Avraham, as I said, the question was a question. Once the question is asked and the dirt is thrown, even Avraham holds Yitzchok, it's clear he's his son because he literally an exact image of his father. And we'll see later, that's the reason why Avraham had an age, because people couldn't differentiate between Avraham and Yitzchak. They looked identically the same. But people always said, but you never know. You never know. Why all those years she was barren, she didn't conceive, all of a sudden, she spent the night with Avimelech, she conceives. Why? So you'd say, well, you never know. Maybe because, once they say maybe because, it's a problem. But that Hashem allowed that question to be asked, maybe because Yitzchak's standing had to be questioned, because if he would have been the son of Avraham, irrefutably, without a question, the balance would have been a proper balance, and as a result of that, the good and evil would have been off. Therefore, Yitzchak had to be compromised for that reason. The way the Torah tells us that Yitzchak and Yishmael buried their father, and it mentions Yitzchak before Yishmael. When Yitzchak passed away, and Yaakov and Esav attended the burial of their father, it mentions Esav before Yaakov. So that we differentiate, even though Yishmael was older than Yitzchak, it mentions Yitzchak before Yishmael. From there we see She'osi Yishmael tshuva, that Yishmael did tshuva. Later in life, Yishmael became a tzaddik. And therefore, he deferred to Yitzchak. He allowed Yitzchak to go first. Esav was a Russia from the beginning till the end. Even though Yaakov already was Yaakov, he had the 12 sons, and he had the meeting with the gift and all that. Nevertheless, Esav held, he's the firstborn. He doesn't let Yaakov be before him. So from there we see Yishmael did tshuva, Esau never did tshuva. If Hashem would present himself in the world, God himself, and a miracle could only be seen as the hand of Hashem, and it can't be attributed to anything else, that would undermine free choice. He's forcing you to believe. Similar to what I told you, Meir says by Kabbalah Satorah, God's presence was so absolute, the Jews had no choice but to accept Hashem to be who he was. That's the Rebbeinu system. Okay? So the Chinuch writes by Kriyas Yamsuf, the Torah tells us that miracle of Kriyas Yamsuf, there's an argument in the Mishnah, we say it in the Agora, whether 50 miracles, 200 miracles, 250 miracles of something in the history of this existence, was nothing ever comparable to that. To Kriyas Yamsuf. But the Torah gives us the scenario, how it happened. At night, there was a gale wind blowing all night. And all of a sudden in the morning, the sea splits. So the Chinuch asks, who's the codifier, why did we have to have all this prelude to the splitting of the sea? Morning comes, we have to go through, the sea splits. Why do we have to have this prelude, this gale wind blowing, and all of a sudden, morning comes, it splits. So the Chinuch says, because if it would have split on the moment, and there wouldn't have been this prelude, basically, humanity is forced to accept that there's a God, and God is absolute without a question. But if anybody wants to delude himself and attribute the splitting of the sea as irrational as it may be, they could attribute it to the gale wind that was blowing all night. Therefore, we have this prelude, not to force a person to a position he must accept. Because otherwise, a person would have no choice but to accept. So that's over there, that's a challenge. Does this put the final lid on God's existence, that he exists, or not? What we're talking about here is something else. We have a counterbalance. Yishmael, Yitzchak is the successor to his father. He's continuing his father's legacy. If he's his father and he is that holy child, because his father was glorified and seen by the world as one of a kind, his father had a counterbalance. If he's the equivalent of that, nobody can be a counterbalance to that. And Hashem always sets it. So we're talking about level of influence. It's not talking about seeing God in the world. That's a challenge. Hashem will never present himself in a way where he can't be, somehow it could be seen differently. There's something else. That this is a regular good and evil issue. Yitzchak, it's not only what he says and his presentation, it's who he is. Makes a difference what level of influence he's going to have. So if he would be seen on that pedestal like his father, one would not have choice. He'd be forced to accept, and that actually undermines the whole concept of free choice, of bechira. The other thing is what God's doing. When God presents himself in his existence, the sun rising and the sun setting, do you think it's less of a miracle than the splitting of the sea? There's nothing beyond God's, but because it repeats itself, you say that's natural. So it's natural, it doesn't impact on us. We don't see it as that's something unusual. But if you think about it, it's miraculous. You get into the scientific background on it, in terms of the sun, the distance from the earth would be anywhere closer to any degree, the world would be incinerated. And if it be further away, the world would just freeze. And the orbits and the balance and the rotation of the earth, everything. If you have meteorites that could destroy the world. If it would hit, the world exists so many years, never hit. Otherwise, the world would have been destroyed. It always somehow misses. It's miraculous. So that itself, because it's natural, it's been happening. You attribute things to flukes, whatever you attribute it to. It's not really comparable to Kriyas Yamsuf. Thomas Sarah Kiryas Arba. Sarah passed away at Kiryas Arba. He Chevron. What's Kiryas Arba? That's Chevron. Beretz Canaan. V'yava Avraham lispod the Sarah Livkoso. And Avraham, he returned to eulogize Sarah and to cry for her. Let's see Rashi. Firstly, why was Heber called Kiryas Arba? It was the community of the four. That's what it means. Kirya is like a village or a town, small town of four. Kiryas Arba, Al Shem Arba Anokim Sho Yushom. It was the location of four giants in that location. Who were the four giants? Achimon, Sheshai, V'Talmai, V'Aviyim. There was the community of the four. It means the four giants. Dover Acher. Another interpretation. Al Shem Arba Zuvish Nikrusham Ishvishtom. The four couples that were buried in the Me'aras HaMachpelah, which is located in Hebron. It's the Kirya of the four couples, the most four special couples who ever lived. Who are they? Adam and Chava. Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve are buried there. Avram the Solo, Yitzchak the Rivka, Yaakov the Leah. Therefore, it's called Kiryas Arba. Now, we speak about how Avram negotiated for the Me'aras HaMachpelah to bury Sarah Imeinu there. And initially, Ephron, who was a bad guy, he had a terrible ayin ra. As the Rabbeinu Bachim points out, the numerical value of Ephron is the same numerical value as ayin ra. It's 400. When he saw the level of wealth that Avraham had, the level of envy was totally corrosive. And he thought he was actually taking candy from a baby with Avraham, because it was known, in the Medrash tells us, the Me'aras HaMachpelah, the cave, had demons in there and all kinds of terrible things that no human being who ever went in there came out alive. So we're talking about a location it's toxic beyond anybody's imagination. And Avraham is willing to pay a fortune for this. So Ephron really, he was laughing his way to the bank over here. And Avraham was willing to pay any price for it because he understood exactly what the location was. And the reason why Hashem, there's the Medrash, had all these ruchos ros, all these evil spirits and demons there, because he wanted to protect the location that nobody should go near there. Because that location is reserved for these four special couples. Adam and Chava buried there. Avram and Yitzchak buried there. Avram and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, and Yaakov and Leah. And because it had to be reserved for that, therefore it was off limits to everyone. That's what it was about. Now, you have a community, it's called Kiryas Arba. But why was it really called Kiryas Arba? Because the four couples, the most four special couples who ever walked the face of earth, that is the location versus even referring to the future. Because Avraham and Sarah only live now. Yitzhak is not married yet. Yaakov hasn't been born yet. But since it's the location, ultimately, the four couples are getting buried there, so the Torah is already identifying what is the value of that location. It's reserved for the four couples. If people would know this, the truth, why, it'd be the hottest commodity in the world. Adam and Eve, the father of mankind. So what happens? Hashem has that the four giants who existed, that was their community. So people would ask the question, why it's called Kiryas Arba? The label was attributed to the giants, although the reality of why it was called Kiryas Arba was because of the four couples that were buried there. It's interesting. Just as we say, the Avraham points out one place that he says, until today, we still have some level of prophecy. He says, when a parent names a child and picks a name for the child, it's semi-prophetic. Why? Because Hashem the Gemara tells us that the destiny of a person is based on the name that he receives. The destiny of a person lies in his name. So if that's the case, how does a person know which name to choose for his child, a boy or a girl? The answer is Hashem puts that name in that person's mind, and at the time of birth, that's the name that's given to the child. And that determines the destiny of that child. So I'm saying here it's called Kiryas Arba. Why innately is this location so special? Why does it have a certain degree, a dimension of value? Because this location is destined to be the location of those 4 special couples who ever walked the face of the earth. But if people would know that, everybody would grab it, would want it. Hashem has demons there, but has these destructive forces. Nobody would go near it. But in addition, the 4 giants were there. So it's not even the consideration, because nobody would even think, because it hasn't yet happened. And the name is attributed to giants, not to the 4 couples. That's the concept. No, it's interesting. The Gemara tells us that the Mishkan, anything that Moshe Rabbeinu was involved in, never fell into the hands of the enemy. It was hidden away. The Aron, the Mishkan, the crushing, it's hidden away forever. Nobody will ever find them. Because since it had such a level of sanctity, it's hidden away from mankind. The Beis HaMikdash was built by Shlomo Melech or by Sheni. It was not at that level, therefore it fell, it was destroyed, it was in the hand of the enemy. But the Mishkan that was built by Moshe Rabbeinu, which in Chazal it's referred to as Zov, is the equivalent of gold, it never fell in the hands of the enemy. Because Moshe Rabbeinu, we speak about the Avos HaKadoshim, Heine Heine Merkava. Before the Mishkan was built, the Mishkan was what? The location of the Shechinah in this world was where? Where Avraham was, where Yitzchak was, and where Yaakov was. We say Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. That's exactly where the Shechinah was. Wherever Avraham was, that's where the divine. He was the holy equivalent of the Holy of Holies until the Mishkan was built. After Yaakov passed away, that didn't exist any longer. Until Sinai and the Mishkan. So it comes out, nobody can have relevance to that location. Just as the Mishkan, nobody but those people have relevance to that because of its innate holiness. These people being the equivalent of the Mishkan, they are the Holy of Holies. Because that's the location of Shekhinah. When they're there, that the location is sanctified to a level, nobody could go near that location. For that reason. That's Kiryat Arba. Kiryat Arba. It's the Kiri of the 4. Adam and Chava being the handiwork of God, they're the most special. And initially he was in Gan Eden before he sinned, before he was driven out. Yitzchak, Avraham, despite everything, he brought God into existence. Yitzchak was a successor, Yaakov was the ultimate. Therefore, the location innately was the holiest location. After the Beis HaMikdash, the Me'aras HaMachpelah is the holiest location because the Avos are there. Rabbeinu Bachya writes here that, when a soul ascends to heaven after when a person dies, many things could happen to the neshama. There are many detours. What's the most direct route for the soul to ascend? Me'aras HaMachpelah. Me'aras HaMachpelah, when they pass away, the neshama goes straight up. When does the soul leave this world? That's at the end of Shabbos. Until the grave is closed, the soul hovers over the body. Once the person's interred in the ground, the soul detaches from this world and ascends to heaven. So when when it ascends, the question is, what route does it take? The most direct route is what? Is the Me'aras HaMachpelah straight up. That's the reason why this location was chosen by them, and that Adam and Chava was buried there, that the most 4 special couples were put into this cave, because that was the direct route on the ascent for that reason. There's the Thomas Kiryas Arba. Now, what is the receptacle for the neshama? The body. The body is made of 4 elements, right? It's known as Dal Yisodus. There's earth, there's water, there's wind, and there's fire. Those are the four elements of the body. That is the domicile of the neshama. So he explains that we say that tzaddikim b'misosam k'ron chayim. A tzaddik, even if he passes away, he's still considered alive. So he explains, what's the halacha? You take a piece of parchment and you process it to be parchment for the sake of the Sefer Torah. And then you write, you have a scribe, a sofer writing a Sefer Torah on that parchment with the right intent. And he writes a full Sefer Torah. What does that parchment become? Before it was ordinary parchment, ordinary ink, it will be ordinary letters. But once you have the full Torah written on that parchment, it becomes the holiest object. It becomes an object of Kedusha. And it has to be dealt with in a very special way. A body is ordinary, it's physical, 4 elements. But if you have a person of a special spiritual status, and he utilizes that body only for Kedusha, only to the will of God, you know what you do? You sanctify it. You sanctify that body. The body becomes an object of Kedusha. And that, he explains, that's tzaddikim b'misosam k'ron chayim. And he cites the Gemara, this Gemara Shabbos, that even when the tzaddik dies, there's a certain aliveness in the body which you can't detect so much. You could detect it even after the soul departs, because the kedusha, the sanctification through that person's life, is left over. There's a remnant that the body becomes an object of kedusha. So therefore, Thomas Bekir Saba, she died Bekir Saba. Even after she passed away, the body remained. There was still an attachment to that body because of the special life that Sarah Imeinu lived. This is the Avraham HaKodesh here. Also, there's a famous Avraham HaKodesh over here. We've said it many times. The pasuk ends, Shnei Chayusora, Kulan Shomen Latova. It says she lived 127 years, and it concludes, and that was the lifetime of Soros. It's obvious. So Rashi cites the Medrash, Kulan Latova, that although when she experienced life, it wasn't so simple, but at the end, in retrospect, Kulan Latova, every detail of her life was seen as the most positive. He goes to explain the Avraham HaKodesh, very famous Avraham HaKodesh. There's a question, when she passed away at 127, was that meant to be, she wasn't meant to live longer initially? She only died as a result of being informed about the Akedah, but she was meant to die at 127, to pass away. Well, no, she was meant to live many years longer, but her life was cut short because of what Satan had shared with her. So she expired years before she was supposed to pass away. So it comes out this way. What happens? All the years she would have lived, and now she's denied those years. So all the mitzvahs and the service of Hashem she would have done during the years, she lost that all. It's not accredited to her account. On that, the Avraham HaKodesh says, comes to tzaddikim shnei chayusora, that despite she didn't live those years, but since if she would have lived those years, she would have been no less than she is now. And even more, she's fully credited for the years that she did not live. That's Shnei Chayusora. She lived 127 years. But in essence, what was the value of her life? The accomplishment was even the year she did not live, because if she would have lived those years, she would have fully invested them in what she represented. That's the Avraham HaKodesh. The Gemara tells us that Shaul HaNovi passed away at the age of 52. And when he passed away, he looked aged. He looked like a man that could have been 100 years old. Why did he pass away at the age of 52? Because who's the one, Gemara tells us, who's the one who anointed Shaul? Shmuel HaNovi. Shmuel HaNovi anointed Shaul to be the king. But because of the story with HaMelech, the kingdom was taken away from Shaul, given to David. Now, for Shaul to pass away in Shmuel's life, it would have caused him tremendous pain. Tremendous pain. So Hashem took Shmuel earlier than he was meant to die. So he should not experience the pain seeing Shaul, his protege, so to say, the ultimate, the first king of Israel, pass away in his lifetime. So, but they said, Shmuel HaNavi was holy, he was the equivalent of Moshe and Aaron. It would be a Chil Hashem. So if Shmuel passes away, it looks like a young man, it's Chil Hashem. So Hashem caused him to prematurely age, that he looked aged, so there should not be a Chil Hashem. So according to what we're saying now, so the years that he would have lived, the only reason why he's being taken early, that it should not be, she should not be paid. By seeing Shaul being taken in his life, that he should not witness Shaul dying. So all the years that he didn't live, he's still accredited. Based on what we're saying now, Shmuel HaNavi was accredited for the years that he was meant to live, because his life was taken earlier, so he should not experience to witness the passing of Shaul HaMelech.